Oh, okay. I also heard that I think it was Mario and Gilda didn't even know the medals that he had from the service because he never talked about it. None of y'all really seem to ever talk about that part.
Joel, you mean?
Yeah, Joel or any of y'all.
There's a write-up that was written by a lady from the University of Texas about the Hispanic military people.
Really?
And there's a story there. Can we stop that?
Yeah.
I may have that. No, I'm sorry, it's downstairs in the car.
Oh, okay.
But there's a write-up they did on Zeke and Joel.
Really?
Yeah. And it tells about that. I'm not sure, it's Hernandez again. They don't talk about that. He never talked about it. Tony never talked about his military service as well. I know he was an ambulance driver, but that's all I know.
I just think it's so amazing that, all of y'all, including you, you don't consider yourself that y'all went off and all y'all came back regardless.
Yeah. The thing I remember when I was home during the war was the little flag that my mom kept. She had the 4 stars, little flag, the 4 stars that indicated, told the neighborhood that she had 4 sons serving in the army during World War II. And they prayed every night for them. And I don't know how they did it, but it was months between letters. They never knew where they were. Mail was slow. Either they forgot to write or didn't write, or wherever they were, there was no post office. I don't know. But Mom and Dad just suffered emotionally, not hearing from them where they were, what they were doing. And so I attribute a lot of love that my mom gave for them through her prayers, and the strength that she had, the inner strength to go through that periods when she didn't know where they were.
Yeah, because a lot of people, were killed, and I remember my grandmother, or it might have been my grandpa, when I asked him his history, how worried and how much he prayed for you boys to come back, because he was, really worried.
Yeah, you asked about racism in those days. This was 1930s, 40s. The 2 brothers that joined, the 2 uncles, my uncles, Jose Angel and Luis, were ministers, and they were asked to attend conferences twice a year. And so the Anglo pastors in their communities would invite them to go with them to drive to wherever the conference was. But when it was dinner time, they'd stop at a restaurant. The white pastors, the Anglo pastors, would go into the restaurants. Uncle Luis and Jose Angel had to go to the kitchen, use the back door. And, that must have hurt.
Yeah.
But the Anglo pastors didn't say a word about that. They didn't stand up for that. And I'm sure that must have hurt them. I'm sure that had a lot to do with Jose Angel's. Also, he was a co-worker with Cesar Chavez. He was the migrant minister with the Cesar Chavez movement. So whenever the migrants traveled north, there goes Tio Jose Angel and his family with them. And that's why all of his children, Tabita, Esther, and their children, David, were all activists. And they still are. Now, when Tio Jose Angel died in Austin, he was buried in a cemetery right next to Highway 35.
Where UT is?
Huh?
Where the University of Texas is?
No. It's more close to Hutto on Highway 35 in that area. Anyway, you can see the highway from where their grave is, and so one of the children said that their dad is buried next to where the migrant would go north. They take that highway 35 north, and they say, well, we can still. I imagine he blesses them as they go by in his grave. You know, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So I did have some racism. I didn't think much of it. I was living in Houston, and Houston was pretty good. I mean, I went to integrated schools and had no problem. I went to Sherman Elementary, John Marshall Junior High, and Javis High School. But when I went back home back to Mackey, to visit a friend of mine, we went to Wharton to the movies. My friend walked into the theater, and I was asked to go upstairs. I couldn't go with him to the lower section of the theater. I mean, but other than that, I don't remember any prejudice. And my brothers, I never heard that. But we do have some activists in the family, I'm telling you.
I remember my grandparents back when the first President Bush was running for senator, and I still have a picture with him somewhere. And their parents, we would go marching with them, you know, pile on those buses and go out with them. And I think you've got articles where they're talking about your dad and grandma and grandpa.
Yeah, they've Houston Chronicle. You can go Google it. They have a long write-up about my dad and all the stuff they did, because they came in after he passed away. They interviewed me and my mom together. Mm-hmm. I can't remember her name, but I'll find it. I'll send it to you. And
well, I'll Google it.
We can Google it, yeah. And his obituary also, all the comments afterwards. You know, when Dad passed away, there was no standing room nowheres. I mean, the place was so packed with people that I was surprised. But the comments on his obituary, where he helped so many people that I never knew he did this, and they were all responding back. Man, if it wasn't for your dad,
that's it. That's the one thing I remember about our family. They never thumped their chest. I did this, I did that.
Yeah.
It was done quietly, humbly, never accepting any tributes to them. They were very humble people, very humble, and they did a lot. And the testimony of those people that came to visit, I'm sure, tells the whole story right there.
Oh yeah. I actually got in contact with a couple of people. We were going back and forth through emails, and I thank them for saying that, for sharing that, because, you know, I'm one of the kids. We didn't know what my dad was doing half the time.
Did Chuck ever talk about his experiences other than what you were telling me at dinner?
In the Navy?
Yeah.
No, in fact, I tried to trick him one time, and I put a camera where he couldn't see it. And he was looking around, and he goes, "Where's the camera?" I go, there's no camera, Dad. I just want to hear your stories. He goes, "No, I know you've got a camera somewhere. I'm not going to do it."
You know, isn't that something?
He wouldn't do it.
And there's people that are just waiting for people to ask them so they can shout it out. Yeah.
Well, my mother always had very fond memories of going to the north to pick cotton. Yeah. Were you a part of that? Because I've seen some pictures.
Yeah, I went with them one time. My mom and dad. My dad was out of a job, so he went with Tio Rafael and Tia Amelia and your mom and Marina and Dalila. We were riding in the back of this truck, and Dalila and Marina would wave at everybody that was behind, that were driving or were passing the truck. And it was a fun trip because we were young. We didn't realize that it was going to be work out there. And we worked in Michigan. We went to Michigan.
Yeah.
Your dad was the manager of a baseball team.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He organized sports wherever he went. And every Sunday, that was our time for doing that. He had his signals to his players were very obvious. You know, nowadays you can't tell when a coach is giving signals. He can be standing and move his feet one way, and that's a signal to do something. But Tio Rafael was funny. For a slide, you know, run, what is it, hit and run and slide. That was a signal. Very obvious.
Again, but hold your hands up
yeah, in front of everybody, you know. It was fun, but it was fun. We picked green beans. One day we were hired by a German family to bale hay, and that was hard. That hay just stuck to you, and just you had to scratch yourself. But they fed you good, man. When we went to dinner, they'd have potatoes and meat and milk and buttermilk, biscuits. But it was hard work. It was hard work. But for us kids at that time, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But those quarters, where we were assigned to live, they were much to be desired. There were outside toilets. Running water was only one spigot outside. You had to bring in the water. Tia Amelia and my mom would cook outside. It was difficult.
Do you remember meeting my dad, Jesse? Because that's, from what I understand, where my mom met him.
No.
Oh, okay.
No, I don't remember that. I know that Dalila, your mom, I think one of the men that drove us was the manager of the group that drove us to Michigan. I think he and your mom, or he loved your mom, he cared for her. His name was, you remember the names of the family that took us? Mm-hmm. They were from Corsicana.
Oh. I know we went to Corsicana looking for them one time, but I don't remember their names.
Yeah, he was a good man. And the two brothers, Jesse was one of them. Yeah, forget the name of the one that was, I think he was in love with your mom. Mm-hmm. But she was only 16, I think, maybe at that time.
Oh.
But, you know, it was a fun time. I have a picture of me and Dalila sitting on top of an old tractor.
Yeah, that's something I've gone through my mother's pictures, and I don't know if I ever sent them to you, pictures from Mackie. I took my grandparents back.
Yeah, you did.
When it was pretty much abandoned at that point.
They were looking for. They went to the Borden Mansion,
mm-hmm.
and they were poking around.
Yeah.
And so I remember some of those places that those pictures showed. Yeah. That was. I had my mom's cousin. Gregorio Valenzuela was also a minister, and he was a particular favorite of the Borden family. In fact, they sponsored him all the way to school in Tex-Mex school, and so he was always invited to come back and visit the Borden family. And I'm sure Mrs. Borden sent Betty and I a wedding present when we were married. She sent us a silver cake cutter.
Wow.
That I had, and so I never sent a written note thanking her, but I came to visit her at the Warwick Hotel here in Houston.
Oh, yeah.
She had a suite up there, and so she was still able to talk and recognize people, and so she was happy to see me. She asked about everybody. She remembered names, Mrs.
Wow.
Gordon.
Wow.
She was a very special lady. So there is a history connected between Hernandez family and Texas history, because A.P. Borden, your dad chauffeured their family. He went to India and brought back the first Brahma cattle,
Oh.
the gray humpback cattle
Yeah.
that you see. He brought back that cattle because it was resistant to ticks and heat, and could manage to live with meager grass, because in India they didn't have that much. But it was a hardy breed, and it was the first herd was quarantined for several days, and they finally brought him to Mackey. And so the logo of the Mackey Ranch became a picture of that Brahma bull sitting on top of a big silo that could be seen from Highway 90.
Wow.
And so I relate that we're related to Texas history through my uncles and my dad.
Wow, I didn't even know that. That's cool.
Yeah.
And, of course, also, if you see some of the Western movies, some of the old Western movies, there's always a character, Shanghai Pierce, or Shanghai. And this was the Shanghai Pierce from Mackey. So we're sort of connected to Texas history in a way.
Yeah.
I'll be doing some research now.
Yeah. If you go to Texas Handbook, you'll see Shanghai Pierce and A.P. Borden in there. I have a picture of them.
Yeah, I'll definitely take pictures of my phone of it before I go.
Pardon me?
I'll take a picture of it for sure. So most of y'all ended up staying in Houston, and then Miguel ended up in Waxahachie.
There's a picture of the Brahma bull,
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
and there's a picture of the logo,
Oh, okay.
the Borden Estate, and there's the logo. And here's a picture of the Bordens, Mrs. Borden. I had a little brother. His name was Rodolfo. He was born in 1934. I think it was 1934, 34, 35. But he was also an athlete. He was a swimmer. And he won several meets. But one day, in May of 1940 something, he came home with a headache and went into the bathroom and collapsed. He was taken to the hospital, and he had a bleeding of the brain.
Oh, no.
And I always attribute that to perhaps he and his friends were doing some horseplay, and he got hit in the head, and had that bleeding originate from that. But he died in.
How much younger was he?
He was about 4 years younger than I was.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was 12 years old when he died.
Wow.
1944 to 1945, I think it was.
Also, my grandparents, didn't they have a baby that died?
I think so.
And then they adopted Benji after the
Benji.
3 girls?
I didn't know Benji that well. In fact, I don't remember him. I know the name. Did you get the name of the child that died?
Yeah, I think I saw it in the history that you sent me. Yeah, but I don't remember it right now.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
What else do you remember about your dad? Or your grandpa?
Grandpa, he was so proud to be an American.
Yeah.
And, you know, I recall not knowing any English till I went to school, and I didn't know English and was ridiculed and bullied, and the teachers were prejudiced at that time and didn't really care that I could get up to speed. But he would always tell me, I remember him always telling me, Vivian, speak English, don't speak Spanish to me. I want to learn English. I'm sure he knew some already, but he always stressed to me, and that I recall telling us, speak English. And unfortunately, we lost most of our Spanish because of that. But he always wanted us to speak English.
Yeah.
And like Danny said, he could tell you the Constitution backwards and forwards. And he was just very, very, very proud, very patriotic. And I love that cowboy hat.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, my dad crossed the river in 1913. And in 1975, I believe, he became a naturalized citizen. Him and my mom and my Ramirez grandfather, my maternal grandfather, became naturalized citizens at that day. And they never criticized the United States. They always stood up for it. Whenever people started bad-mouthing the United States, they would stand up and say, hey, that's our country. We got to support that country. So they never criticized. When President Roosevelt died in 1944, I remember my mom and dad just crying, tears flowing. I thought the world had come to an end because they loved that man, Franklin Roosevelt. And I guess because he was the president, he was their president. And so and now I know why Tio Rafael became such an activist and a supporter of the United States, because he carried that Bill of Rights, the Constitution, with him.
And the Bible.
And the Bible.
Yeah.
I tell you, our kids should, I wish I could pass on every bit of history that I know, because we come from a great tradition, good family. I don't think there's anybody in our family, ancestors, that we can say we are not proud about. We should be proud of all our family. They've accomplished so much. Look at our kids, your kids, what they've accomplished. And my mom and dad, we spoke Spanish at home. When we went to school in Mackay, the teachers, they were Hispanic. But they were instructed by the boards to teach us English. And so if they heard a word of Spanish, we got rapped on the knuckles with a ruler. English. And so
That's probably where Grandpa
Betty, my wife, comes from Falfurrias, and she had an accent, Hispanic English accent. And so I told her, when our kids, if we have kids, they're going to speak English. And so they did, and they don't speak Spanish, but they don't have the accent.
I was going to say, and at least we don't have the Texas accent either.
Yeah. And so I'm glad that we were assigned to Panama, because they learned Spanish in Panama.
Yeah.
We had that maid that came in, and she spoke Spanish, so our kids learned Spanish. And they still remember a few phrases, but for the most part.
Yeah, that's where we started picking it up again, too. So tell me about your time in Panama. How did you end up there?
I had a very good tour of duty in Panama. I was stationed in England between 1958 to 1962.
In the Air Force?
In the Air Force. I was in the Air Force. I was in the in the Air Force. I was a medical technician working in the flight surgeon's office with pilots. I met some interesting people while I was there in Panama, in England. I don't know how many of you remember General Chappie James, the first black 4-star general.
Oh, really?
He was a Tuskegee Airman, but he rose to the rank of 4 stars. He was one of our patients there at the flight surgeon's office. He was a huge man, and he flew F-101, a fighter aircraft. He was the operations officer for the squadron, and he would come in. He was overweight. He had high blood pressure, but we always pencil whipped his physical, and he always met the standards. He was never grounded by us anyway, and he appreciated that. He knew me by name. We'd meet wherever at the BX base exchange or wherever, and he would greet me by name and say, "How's my doc?" Because I was the one that gave him his physical exam, and so he would thank me for that. He says, "I know I'm overweight. I know I have high blood pressure, but I like to fly." So we kept him flying. But after I left England, I was assigned to Randolph Air Force Base. After a couple of years there, I became interested in another assignment, and there was an assignment open as an instructor at the Inter-American Air Forces Academy in the Canal Zone in Panama. It was on the Pacific side. I applied, took a picture with Betty and our 3 kids at that time. Betty, when she was young, she was well, she still is, but she was a beautiful lady. And I always tell her that when the people that reviewed my application saw that picture, family picture, they saw her and they said, "Yeah, we'll take that family," because she looked beautiful. And our 3 kids were good looking too. So anyway, we were assigned to the Inter Air Force Academy in Panama in the medical division. I was an instructor. I knew Spanish. I could read and write, and I could speak it, but it was Tex-Mex Spanish. So I had to take a 6-month course in Castilian Spanish so I could be assigned there as an instructor. My duties as an instructor were anatomy and physiology, basic anatomy and physiology, and administrative paperwork. We'd have 2 semesters of school, 6 months each, and then we'd have a month off. And during that month off, we would travel to different countries to evaluate the progress of our previous students, our graduates, how they were doing medical-wise and stuff. But it was also a civic action type of thing, because during this time, Che Guevara, you remember Che Guevara he was part of Fidel Castro's revolution. He was his #1 lieutenant. He was Fidel Castro's #1 lieutenant, Che Guevara. And Che Guevara had left Cuba in 1966 and had disappeared. Well, the CIA had tracked him to Bolivia. And so he was in Bolivia. And so we were asked at that particular time to do a medical civic action trip to different areas in Bolivia. Unbeknownst, I did not know this at the time, and our team didn't know this, I don't think, our medical team, because we were there to treat patients. But we were joined in Bolivia by 3 other people. One a photographer, and 2 others were just administrative technicians, they called them. But they were actually CIA people, who, while we were attending the patients, they were out interviewing people. They were taking pictures. They would say to the campesinos, stand here. And so the campesino would stand there, but in the background was different scenarios. So the photographer was not noticed as taking pictures of what was behind them. They were focused on the people here. But you know, as a photographer, that you could enhance the background and stuff like that. That's what they did. So they, through that intelligence that was provided undercover from us, as well as from the campesinos, they learned where Che Guevara was. After our visit there, it was about 3 months later where they located him, and that's when they tracked him down to a particular area in Bolivia, and the Bolivian army tracked him and captured him, captured Che Guevara. And then at the instructions of the President Barrientos at the time, René Barrientos of Bolivia, he was executed. So, based on our intervention, I guess from a medical standpoint, Che Guevara was captured and killed. He was buried at the end of one of the runways of the nearest airport there, and in order for the president to ensure that it was Che Guevara, they cut his hand off so they could take the fingerprints, and they sent that hand to the capital, La Paz, where he was identified as Che Guevara, so he was confirmed. But anyway, my assignment to Panama was an instructor at the Inter-American Air Forces Academy. And every 6 months we'd go to either Bolivia or the Dominican Republic or Honduras, El Salvador, all over Central America. And I was fortunate to be on flying status as a medical technician, and I would get on flights that go from the Canal Zone to deliver groceries and other goods to the embassies of South American countries, American embassies. And so I was able to go to Chile, to Argentina, to Paraguay, on board this aircraft that was delivering groceries and other goods to the embassies there. So it was a very interesting time in Bolivia, in the Canal Zone. I met Jimmy Doolittle. You remember Jimmy Doolittle, the general that led the flight to bomb Tokyo in 1942?
Oh, really?
There's Jimmy Doolittle was the leader of this squadron of airplanes, B-24s, that bombed Tokyo, and it was a boost for the United States after the attack on Pearl Harbor. So I was able to have lunch with Jimmy Doolittle when he came to visit us in Panama. Short guy, but very pleasant individual.
Where were you stationed there?
In Albrook Air Force Base.
Albrook.
Now, another interesting thing about Albrook Air Force Base that I did not know about. In one of the hangars, Albrook Air Force Base was not an active Air Force runway for the Air Force military aircraft, but it was for the U-2 aircraft that did the flights, spy flights over Russia. And there was a squadron of those airplanes there in Albrook that I did not know. they took off every night, and they'd fly all night long to Russia, and they would film, take pictures from over 100,000 feet, and they'd come back early morning. Airplane didn't make any noise that I knew about, and landed. So that was taking place while I was there, and I was either too naive or whatever, but no one talked about that. The U-2s were assigned there in Panama.
I remember there was I think it was an army base right behind our house where we lived.
Yeah, it was.
I don't remember the name of it though.
Fort Sheridan was one. Kobe was another one.
I don't recall, but I do remember, because there was so much military there.
Mm-hmm.
My dad, when he would go to his job, he would have to dodge snipers because they didn't like the white Americans back then. But I do remember also, remember the Green Beret song? The guy that sang that Green Beret song, he came there to Panama. We got to meet him.
Well, in the canal, in the Atlantic side of the canal zone, they had the School of the Americas for the Army, and that's where the Army trained South American and Central American soldiers in counter espionage and all that stuff. And that's why in the later years, the School of the Americas came under fire for producing so many dictators for South American countries, because the officers that came to school there returned to their countries, and a lot of them became high-ranking officers in their country, and one or two became presidents through coups, military coups. In fact, while we were in Panama, we went through two coups. Two presidents were overthrown. Remember Omar Torrijos? Does that name ring a bell in history? He was a very charismatic president of Panama, but he was a military officer, and he was one of his lieutenants was Barrientos, not Barrientos. He was convicted of smuggling and stuff like that, and came to the United States and died here in the United States in Florida after his capture. He tried to overthrow the government, and she was not successful. But we went through two coups there.
Do you recall, I was just a kid, but do you recall when the thing with Cuba and President Kennedy? I think I remember them sending us home from school. And I know in Panama we used to have bomb drills when we were in school. Yeah.
Probably during that time was the Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba by activists under the CIA. It was a very, and Kennedy was involved in that, President Kennedy. But it was a very ill-planned invasion. Everything went wrong that could go wrong. And that force that landed to try to take over Cuba was just all of them, well, not all of them, but most of them were killed or wounded, and it was not a very successful. And that's probably why Cuba was always trying to initiate insurgency into other countries. That's when Russia started to bring in missiles, the missile crisis of Cuba. So, yeah, it was an interesting time for you all, an interesting time for us too. And your dad probably, United Fruit was known to be an arm of the CIA. Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
Yeah.
Really?
So if you learned the United Fruit was a hated company at one time by South America because they knew that the CIA ran.
No wonder they didn't like my dad.
The CIA was connected to the United Fruit. Yeah, look into that.
I don't know. You know, that reminds me. Somebody. It might have been Greg. Somebody told me also that my dad would train the. What do they call those ones in the Navy? That real elite force.
Navy SEALs?
Yeah.
Oh.
That he had something to do with the SEALs. I go, why haven't never?
Well,
told
you
me?
see,
I don't know.
I always try to get Chuck to talk to me about that, but he
Yeah.
never did.
Now that you mention that they were CIA, and my
so-
dad worked for them.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I think you'll find a connection
Wow.
there, and there's another connection to history.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know my parents used to always go in the jungle and find old bottles. Did y'all
Yeah.
ever do that?
Yeah. In fact, I have a
They brought
bottle
some back, yeah.
that your mom gave me.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's an old bottle, and it still has a little sand and dirt inside
Yeah.
of it. But she gave it to me and said that they found it in
Yeah,
Panama.
they would go digging, and that's when they were building the canal that they found all those old bottles, and I tried to keep as many as I could.
If, next time I come, I'll bring you some books that I have about the invasion of Panama, and I'm sure when you see the names of some of the places, you'll remember that hey, I lived here, or
Yeah.
I went to school here, because some of those schools that you attended probably had been taken over by the troops from the Panamanian military, and they were invaded by Americans.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, we got so dark from the sun that nobody could tell us from the Panamanians.
Yeah, I remember La Loteria in Panama, the lottery. But I considered Colon a very dirty city. Did you remember that?
Yeah. Have you seen pictures of what Panama looks like now? I mean, it's very unbelievable how
Yeah.
they've grown.
I wanted to take a cruise back to Panama and get off the ship and just visit old places. But you can get a lot of those pictures from YouTube
Yeah.
about what Panama looks like, what it used to look like, the building of the Panama Canal, blah, blah, blah.
Oh, I always watch anything on PBS, because I don't have cable, that has to do with the history of Panama or anything during that time. The Bay of Pigs, you know, all these different versions that people have. The history is very interesting.
Yeah. Manuel Noriega is the guy that was a very sinister Panamanian. He's the one that tried the coup against Torrijos and failed, and then he became president. So, or he wasn't the president; he was the power behind the president, because the president always had to have the Panamanian military behind him to continue ruling. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. So the military in Panama used to run the country.
Tell me about your family. How many kids you have, their names, how many kids they have.
Betty and I were married in 1957, so this coming Friday, the 16th, we're celebrating our 61st anniversary.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
We have 3 children, Steve and Cindy, our oldest, were born in Panama, and golly, were born in England.
Oh.
Steve was born in 1960. He was born in an English hospital, and Cindy was born in the military hospital, the Air Force hospital at Bentwaters Air Base in England. And then we came back, and our youngest daughter was born at Fort Sam Hospital in San Antonio. Steve has 3 daughters. Ashley, and Deanna, and Gabby. Ashley is married to a Jamaican by the name of Cameron Foster. They don't have any children. Deanna is married to Jason Nave. They don't have any children. Gabby is a as of this date, 2018, she's a freshman at the University of Texas in San Antonio. Kathy is the youngest. She has 2 children, Alex and Shelby. Alex is a senior at the University of Oklahoma. Shelby graduated from Texas State with a degree in nursing, and she works in. She makes her specialty as a delivery nurse at the Seton Medical Center in Austin. And she's not married. Alex is not married. And our middle child, Cindy, has 2 children. Joey, graduate of Texas State, and Lisa, who's also a graduate of Texas State. Joey right now left his job in Austin and is in Nashville, following his dream to become a country music drummer.
Oh, wow.
His friends from high school formed a band, and they're still together, and they're all in Nashville at this moment, trying to make connections and hoping to go into the music industry.
What's the name of the band, you know?
The name of the band is Bear, B-E-X-A-R.
Okay.
Now, they may have changed, but that's the name that they went under. They've made 1 album, and I think it's on YouTube somewhere.
Yeah, we'll look it up.
I haven't been able to find it. So, that's my family.
So I hope everybody saw this video, and I hope that you pass it on to the next generation, because our history is very important, and unfortunately sometimes you don't think about it till you get older and you get nostalgic and you think about the past, your childhood, and recall all those memories. And thanks to Ruben here, he can tell us all about it, because I didn't get much history from my parents. They wouldn't do it on video. And so luckily y'all have something to go by, because I've learned some things today, and I hope the rest of you do as well. Anything to say, Danny?
Man, I've learned a lot of interesting things that happened in our past that I'm proud of, and I'm so thankful that Uncle Ruben here came in to show us all this and remind us of all these memories and show us where we came from and what has surpassed. It's really awesome. You'll enjoy it.
Don't forget, this generation paved the way for us to have what we have, and I will be eternally grateful and thankful.
Me too.
Thank you, Evelyn.